did a lot of her music, and you told me you couldn't do something, and you kind of didn't play with her for a while.
Well, I just, I played on her first record, and maybe I've told other people, but very quickly, Bob Belden. Do you remember him?
Sure, I remember Belden.
And he had a band. It was like a nonette or something like that, and I was in that band. And Maria would come to our gigs, and I was like, "Who's this gal that's coming to our gigs at Visione? Do you remember Visiones?"
Visiones.
And so it turned out she was a composer, and she wanted to do a recording, and so she asked me to do it, and I was like, and Frank and I have compared notes on this. It's like, well, who is she? Sometimes you want to vet somebody before you play with them, but she had no body of work because she wasn't really an instrumentalist. She was more of a composer, So anyway, I agreed to do the record, and it was with Dennis McCrell and Kenny Werner and Scott Robinson and Rick Margitza, a lot of great players. And that was her first record called Evanescence. And so it came out I don't think she had a record deal. I think she had to shop it around. And finally, Enja picked it up and put it out. And then it had some success. But before it had some success, she got this gig at Visiones. And I had just gotten married, and it was in 92. And I kind of had just bought this house upstate, and I wanted to be up here on a Monday night, and with my wife. So I said, you know what, I think you better find somebody else to play in the band. So she got Tony Sher, great bass player, and he did it for a few years, maybe 5 years. And eventually she asked me if I would come back. And at that point I had been married for 4 or 5 years and had this house, and I was ready to be more in New York. So I said yes. And it was a record of hers called Concert in the Garden. And so I've been with her ever since, and she's, I love playing her music, and I love the people in the band. And as I've said other times, she's one of those people like Nils Winter or Rich Perry or Vic Juris or Frank Kimbrough or Bob Mincer or whoever, the people that I've had long associations with, that just kind of believe in you and your ability to bring what you do to their music. I would like to think it's not just because I'm a guy holding a bass, but because of what I contribute to their musical vision. And Maria is like at the top of that list. She's, and I
She's
still
got a
play
very
with her.
strong vision.
Yeah,
She does have.
yeah.
She does have that, and just in speaking of long associations, since you mentioned your wedding, getting married, that's been a very long association as well for you. You've been married for what, 40 years almost, something?
No, like 33 years.
Ah,
And in a way, it's like my proudest achievement. It's my wife, Marianne. She goes by her maiden name, Marianne Matthews. And she's a talented, beautiful, loving, great person, and put up with me for all these years. And as anybody know, marriage is give and take and compromise. And so I'm very proud of our relationship. And
is she an artist of some kind as well, or?
she's an actress. She doesn't make her living doing that. She went to the actor's studio and got her second. She had a master's in English literature from NYU, and got her second master's from the actor's studio.
Well, not
So
just anyone goes to the actor studio.
I'm sorry.
I said not just anyone goes to the actor studio.
Right. They had an affiliation with NYU, or no, with the New School at that time. And James Lipton was running the thing, and it was that era. So she got her second master's there, and and she still does acting projects, and she's selective about what she does. It has to resonate with her, and she still works in communications independently. And yeah, so she's doing great.
Well, in our profession, to keep a marriage together for that long is an achievement.
Yeah,
Especially the amount of time you've been on the road and all that too. It's not, like you just were playing club days on the weekends at home.
right. Yeah,
So, and even that's rough.
right.
There are a couple of other people, many other people I wanted to ask you about. I know that, I didn't know Vic Juris, but he was certainly a fine musician. And
Oh, he's, whenever you mention Vic to people that know his playing, the first thing they say is how, like, what a underrated musician he was. Not that, he was always working and was successful, but he was kind of in that same era as Mike Stern and Frizzell and Schofield and Matheny. And you know
they got the,
I'm pretty sure if you asked any one of those guys about Vic, I know they all were fans, and had held him with the highest regard. And he's another person that just I played, I think, on 14 of his recordings, and just an amazing, he's like one of the, like Tiger Woods, he was put on earth to play golf. Vic was put on earth to play guitar.
yeah. And speaking of people like that, and also who are underrated, one of my very favorite tenor players is also someone you've done a lot of stuff with, and I consider him probably, if not the most underrated in a certain way, definitely right up there, is Richie Perry.
I agree.
I mean, people don't know how great this guy plays. I don't. I mean, people are always talking, and I mean, there's very good players, and we all know the ones that get touted, and they deserve it as well. But Richie always seems to be under the radar a little bit.
And he, in a way, I don't want to say he likes it that way, but it fits who he is. You know what I mean? He's not a cover of Downbeat magazine kind of guy, even though he should be. He quietly. I've played on him and Vic. I've played on more records than anybody, and it's about 14 or 15 with each of them. And Rich is still playing his ass off. We play together with Maria and his own projects, and whether it was Harold Danko a few years ago, or now we play John Riley and Gary Versace, another person I'm very close to musically and personally, pianist.
From Portland, right?
Yeah, so we've done about 5 records with that quartet, and you asked me earlier, there's one that's still in the can that should be out soon, or maybe it's just coming out, I forget. We did it about a year ago.
Uh-huh. There's a couple of other people too that have, that you've made some records with, and I just wanted to talk about one cat. I mean, well, of course, we'll get to Michael Brecker and Benny Walls and Konitz and the better known people, but um, one guy who I learned a lot from, when I was 15 years old, we lived for 6 months in Cincinnati. Well, actually, and I got to study with a guy who was, maybe, as far as a teacher was concerned, taught me maybe more than anything in those 6 months. And he's not with us anymore. He died rather young, I thought. I think he was, maybe didn't even, if he made 60, I'm not sure. And I saw that you had recorded with him, Gordon Brisker.
Yeah, I played on one of his records. Great musician. I mean, he was, as I recall, he was based in LA.
Yeah, he was out there from Cincinnati.
Right.
He was with Woody in the
Right.
vintage before you were with Woody. In
Yes.
fact, Gordon's story he told me was that he was featured, and he was kind of the tenor player on the band. And then one day he went to rehearsal, and there was Sal Mystico.
Oh,
And he said that was like, that was it. Sal just had more dynamism.
yeah, yeah.
Was really,
But
um,
were they on the band together?
yeah. And then he was writing a little bit for the band, and he wrote a couple of charts for them. And he that was the Phil Wilson band,
Uh-huh.
and but he said that Sal, as soon as Sal played Sister Sadie, that was that was it. And Gordon was like very cynical about a lot of things. He would say, he said there's a certain formula for playing for jazz careers. Many jazz careers go like this: from Berkeley to Woody, or Buddy to Oblivion.
I thought you were going to say the other famous joke, and I'll just use my own name so as not to put it. It's like, who's Jay Anderson? Get me Jay Anderson. Get me a young Jay Anderson. Who's Jay Anderson? It comes full circle.
That's what, who told me that one? Mike Brecker one day.
Oh wow.
We were talking, and it was when Steps Ahead had just kind of come out. And I said, so Mike, he's still doing a lot of studio day. We were, Mike and I were really good buddies. We have a long history together, and used to practice hours and hours. We'd both fall asleep with our horns and then wake up and start practicing again at this loft that he had.
Yeah.
But anyway, Mike and I, so I said, how's your studio? Are you still doing a lot of studio stuff? Because you were like the busiest guy I ever met. He said, well, it's slowing down. I said, what happened? He said, yeah. And then he said, it's like, who's Mike Brecker? Get me Mike Brecker. And then back all the way back to who's Mike Brecker. I said, he said, the reason is somebody the other day asked me if I could play something a little more like Clarence Clemens.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect entree to talk about him just for a second.
Yeah, let's talk about him. I loved him, and
I got to know him a little bit when I was with Carmen, and we would do these. It was the Cool Jazz Festival. Remember when it?
I remember KOOL.
Yeah, cool. The Cool Cigarettes or whatever it was were the sponsors, and so we would do gigs with Carmen, and he was there with the Brecker brothers, and we were on flights together. And at one point, he heard our rhythm section. He said, "Man, we're going to be in Nice together, doing the Nice Festival for George Wein.
Grand Parade.
Said, would you guys play with me, quartet?" And we were like, let me think about that for a minute, So we were, of course, just like thrilled, And so.
And who was the rest of that rhythm section?
Marshall Otwell and Mark Pulis, a drummer who is still around. He lives in Milwaukee area. He's from Racine, Wisconsin, I think, the town. He still lives there. And so we were just going to play tunes, and so they booked the thing. And then at the last minute, they put Richie Cole on the bill with us. And nothing against Richie Cole, but it put it into a whole other zone that we were wanting to go into. But so then I remember running into Mike at the back of Bradley's. We're just standing in the back listening to somebody, I don't remember who, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm recording with this band Steps. Do you want to come hang at the studio?" And he didn't know me really, but it was so nice of him. I couldn't do it, so I didn't do it. But then a couple years after that, I was playing with Eliane Elias, who was the wife of Randy at the time. And so I would play with her, and Mike came to a couple of our gigs at what was Sweet Basil at that time. And he, and I was playing with Randy also a little bit, with Randy and Bob Berg. And so Mike kind of knew about that, and he was looking for a bass player. And I think Nussbaum said, "Oh, do you know Jay?" He goes, "Yeah, I know Jay." So I went to his pad and we played, and he hired me, and I did that quartet with Joey Calderazzo and Nussbaum for about 2 years. And then Paul Simon wanted Mike to go on the road.
I remember that.
Yeah, so Mike, of course, couldn't. I mean, I always sensed with Mike, whatever he was doing, he always kind of longed to do. You know, he could do so many things that when he was playing, you know, hard-hitting jazz with his own band, you know, he missed playing more commercial music. And then when he was playing with CHAKA KHAN or Paul Simon or any of that stuff, that he kind of longed to do his own thing, you know. So he went off to play with Paul Simon for a couple of years, and great bread. And then he came, after that was done, then he restarted the Brecker Brothers.
I used to tease him. I used to call him Mike Kvetcher. Because he was always like, I'm not happy on this band. I'd rather be doing this, and I'd rather, you know. And I mean, I was like, you know, I would tell him, because when you're good friends with somebody, you say, man, look, just do you know what you just said? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Paul
yeah.
offered you how much? Because that's what he told me. He said, you know, he's going to pay me such and such, so I got to do this. It was like, I have to do this because they're offering me so much money. And I said, well, yeah, you know, am I supposed to now feel, what am I supposed to feel when you tell me that? You know, that was funny.
Yeah, thank you for catching that.
And yeah, well, there was, I was going to say that, you know, Richie Cole and Mike and Roger Rosenberg and I all went to Phil Woods' jazz camp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got a scholarship there when Phil heard me when I was like 15. Mike was a couple years older, and he had been there. He just came to visit for the week, that one of the weeks that I was there, but that's where we became friends. When I was 15 and Mike was almost 18, I think he was.
Okay.
And Roger Rosenberg, wonderful baritone player, was there.
I know Roger. Yeah, he played in Mincer's band. We played together. Yeah.
And you know, that was the whole. Yeah, at that time, there was a lot of Mincer was part of that, and Bob Berg, God bless him, and you know, a lot of Grossman and Liebman and those guys, and I think they liked me because they all played so much Coltrane. I got some trained through osmosis, just playing with those guys. I think I got from that, but the fact that I was more into Sonny Rollins and Konitz and you know, Bird, though we were all into Bird too. They kind of like, and I was an alto player too.
Right.
So it was a beautiful place to be because I didn't have any of the competition except Bob Berg, who always wanted to kill you. Bob took no prisoners.
He was a trip, man. I mean, you know.
Bob and Billy Huber were two guys that were, I mean, you better have your shit together.
I played on a couple of Ronnie's records too, on Steeplechase. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bob was quite something.
I loved him, like on those. I guess I first became familiar with him on Eastern Rebellion. Cedar Wall, you know, George Coleman was on one. They had the same cover, but one was the first one was George Coleman.
Was on one too.
Yeah, and then Bob was on the second one, and I just remember going to hear that band at Dante's when I still lived in California.
I heard him at Boomers in New York.
You know, and it was just, I guess it was Sam Jones and Billy Higgins, maybe.
Yeah.
Just ridiculous, you know, amazing.
Yeah. And I guess you played with Benny Wallace too, right?
I did, yeah. I was in his band for a couple years. Right when he signed with Blue Note. And we were touring quite a bit. We went to Japan a couple times and played around, you know. I always dug Benny. He had a really different thing, you know.
He did. We were very good friends. I mean, he taught me a lot about the harmonics on the saxophone. I mean, he's really, you know, a thorough, I mean, he's more than that, but he's a thorough technician as far as knowing about esoteric things about the horn. And
yeah, he was like old and new at the same time, you know.
Yeah. And Benny was such a practicer that, I mean, I was practicing maybe 5-6 hours a day and playing sessions and doing all this. Is when I was in my early 20s and everything, you know. I went to Brazil for 7 months in 1974.
Oh, wow.
And I had a basement apartment on McDougal Street.
Oh, huh.
So when I went away, Benny was between pads, and he sublet my apartment. And two things very funny about Benny was I had asked him some questions about overtones, and I got a letter. He had my address in Brazil. Um, the letter was a detailed description of how to do certain things with overtones, 27 pages long.
Oh, my God.
In handwriting. He wrote me a detailed description of when you do the overtones, be careful. The tendency is to put too much pressure on the top. Do not do this in big double letters, like underlined.
Uh-huh.
What you want to is maintain the steady airflow, blah, blah, blah. So it's this and that. And he practiced so much that my neighbors, this was really funny, they said to me, we barely put up with you hours and hours every day, but we're actually after this guy. We're so glad you're back.
He's not a guy you want to have a hotel room next to,
No.
But I did many times.
Yeah. Hotel rooms next to somebody are very interesting. I once was in Amsterdam. I had a hotel room next to Freddie Hubbard, and I'd met Freddie once when I was a teenager, but I hadn't seen him for a long time. And of course, we didn't know. I knew it was him. I don't think he knew it was me because I was just not very, I didn't know him too well. And so the next day, I just said, that was a nice duet because we started to play Stella by Starlight together through the walls.
Oh, wow.
And I said, that was really nice duet. He said, oh, was that you, man? And
that's funny.
We kind of be friends. And
amazing.
The another person, you had some Lee Konitz experiences, right? Now, did you know him, or did they pick you up with him, or?
I really, that's another situation where they kind of put me, hired me to play with Lee, and Lee, had done so many records with so many people,
right?
That he was just like, whatever, and so, but I played, I think, on maybe 3 of his records and the one with Paul. And then I did a couple gigs with him. I flew to Cape Town, South Africa, with Matt Wilson, and Peter Bernstein was supposed to play guitar, but he got to the airport. I think they lived in the same building, maybe. I think he's known Pete since he was a little boy or something. And South Africa had a thing where if your passport, even if you had pages, you had to have X amount of pages left, or they wouldn't let you get on the plane. So they wouldn't let him get on the plane. And so he just blew it off. There was still enough, really not even enough time to go to the passport office and get a new flight. So Lee was fine. He's like, whatever, just don't worry about it. So
did you play trio, or?
So we just played trio with Matt, and we were backstage, and you fly 20 hours or whatever to get somewhere, and you're going to do a 1-hour concert, one concert. And I was like, so Lee, what are we going to play? And he was like, I don't know. You'll know him. And so for about 15 minutes, for 15 minutes, I hounded him. I'm like, come on, man, throw me a bone. Just a couple tunes, like, oh, well, probably, I don't even remember what it was. I'm sure we played all the things and whatever from his hit parade, and right. It was fine. It was a great gig. But I remember when we, have you ever been to South Africa?
No.
It's an endless trip to get there. And both Matt and I were in coach, and I think Lee was in business. And so Matt and I got off the plane, and we only had X amount of time to go to another terminal and start the check-in process all over. It was this big convoluted thing. But we couldn't go with Lee because, he was with a different group of people. And so we finally got checked in, and we were kind of worried because he was a pretty old guy then, and we were like, man, I hope Lee's going to make it, because we didn't see him at all, And
Was
so
he
we
in
get
his
to the
80s
boarding,
or?
we got to the boarding gate, and he was already. Oh, what took you guys? You know, we were just amazed that he was there already, and so anyway, that and I played with him and Dan Tepfer not that long, maybe 2 years before he passed away, and that's when he was singing
He
his
wanted to
solos a
step
lot,
in thinking that, yeah, he was.
and that was so amazing. You know, some people are like, "Oh, he's singing his solos. I came to paid to hear him play alto," you know, but it was so revealing to hear how his mind worked, you know, as an improviser.
Yeah, isn't it? You know what? One thing I used to do with him, because I've known Lee since I was 17, and you know we made a cover record together, and we've actually I have these tapes now that from a duet concert we did at Harvard University and also at the Museum of Fine Arts, and a quintet we had at Sweet Basil, and it's all was very good. But the thing that we used to do, and he never knew when he was going to do it. You'd be on the phone with him, and Lee would say, "Okay, Bob, you know, uh, all the things," or something like that, you know, and he would just start sing, like someone in love or something, and he'd scat, and I would scat. We'd trade eights on the phone, and so that was just such a wonderful experience to be sitting there, and you know, if we'd have a lull in the conversation or something, he'd say, "How about this?" And now my voice, because of this tracheostomy, is gone, and you know, I can't sing anymore. Which I said would I started to sing tunes with lyrics, and I think some jazz critics are happy that it happened to me. But, uh, you know, but you know, have you when you're teaching, like, do you are you teaching like all like ensemble classes and things like that as well, or?
I've been teaching at Manhattan School of Music for 26 years, and I've been there through initially Justin DiCiocio ran the program for the bulk of my time there. Then Stefan Harris took over for 3 years, and then he left, and Ingrid Jensen, my friend Ingrid, took over, and we knew each other from playing with Maria. We stood next to each other, you know, and so. Um, I mean, what was your point about the teaching thing?
Oh, just you know, some things that you stress in your,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
when you're teaching, just
Oh,
like,
you asked if I teach ensembles, and at MSM I don't, because when I started there, I was on the road so much. It was much easier to make up a lesson than it was to miss an ensemble. You know, you got to get a sub and do all this. So I have never taught by design ensembles there. I do teach an ensemble at Jersey City University, and I
there
give
for
a
a while.
couple. I'm sorry.
I used to teach there too.
Oh yeah, and you know, I really like teaching there. You know, I like the kids there, and um, you know, in Manhattan, almost without exception, the my students are like great players already. You know, I mean, and I'm not teaching them how to play the bass. You know, it's more like I'm trying to present options, because there's some that want to play gut strings and play like Paul Chambers, and it's like, well, there's some other music. You're never going to play like Paul Chambers better than him, you know. So I try to offer other things that they might want to consider, and then conversely, some people want to play free music, and it's like, well, this is a music that has a legacy, and you know, if you want to play jazz, you almost have an obligation to, if you're going to be part of this continuum, you got to go back and learn about the history of the music and the people. You know, I'm not the first one to say it, but if you're into some young guy on drums, well, listen to the people that he listened to, you know, he or she listened to, so that you're getting the full, you know, the vocabulary, the harmony, the time, the history. So I try to stress all of that, you know, with my students, but not so much in ensembles, you know.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that. Some other people I'd like to just mention. You know, you've had some unusual recording situations. Like you told me a little story about I think you're on an Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah, very quickly. This is kind of a crazy story throughout, but I was in Texas, in San Antonio, at this club, Caravan of Dreams, with Toshiko Akiyoshi and Bob Moses. And so we got, we flew in, we're at they had a restaurant on the bottom floor, so we're having lunch. And the woman who was our host that brought us there said, "Oh, do you know Allen Ginsberg? He's sitting over there. He was at a table by himself eating lunch." I didn't know who he was. I'm embarrassed to say,
You didn't follow
And,
beat poetry.
pardon me?
You didn't follow beat poetry.
Exactly. I actually, there were other people that I was kind of into, like Jack Kerouac. I read On the Road and some other stuff, but I wasn't really familiar with him. So we talked. He was lovely, and he goes, "Well, what time is your gig?" And I told him. He goes, "Well, I'm playing like 2 hours before you. Why don't you come and play with me?" And I was like, "Okay, what are we going to play?" He goes, "It doesn't matter." So he had his harmonium, and he actually did Howl, the poem that he was most famous for, I guess. And when I got there with my, I'm sorry?
It starts, "I saw the best minds of my generation," and it goes on, "by saintly motorcyclists." And
Yeah, you have that incredible memory. All I remember is going, arriving with my bass, and the smell of weed permeated the backstage area. But and he was totally cool. He was just like, "Oh, just play what you're hearing or not." So we went out there and we played for an hour and a half, and of course, after that, then I did research and realized, oh man, I just had the honor of playing with a legendary guy. But so that was an hour and a half of my life.
well, there's quite a few of these legendary people. We can just maybe go through them a little bit, but it's pretty funny. I mean, and not necessarily. Well, you got to play with Michel Legrand. Says, did you
Well, him, I actually played. I was in his band for a while, so that
really?
I did for a year or two, and that was with Vic Juris and Bob Belden and John Riley. And it's funny, when I talk to you, I realize these recurring names, and it just reinforces in me how these relationships that one nurtures over the course of your musical life, and how important it is. You can look back and see how things kind of work together. So we were
Michel
doing.
played piano. I mean, and
He played piano and he
vocal.
sang, and we would play with symphony orchestras. And we get to town, we do a quick rehearsal. We played all of his hits, and it would start with him and me. The orchestra wasn't in position, and he and I would go out and we'd play. I forget what's the tune that's nothing but minor 2/5s.
You must believe in spring.
You Must Believe in Spring. And he could never remember what key it was in. So he would just start playing and singing, and then I'm there trying to, playing in a concert hall, trying to, follow him. And then slowly the orchestra, like we do that, and then the orchestra would kind of casually come out, like on the second tune or whatever. And that was incredible, man, to hear the beauty, having grown up playing in orchestras also, just playing his beautiful tunes with that luscious, the strings and the woodwinds.
For the most part, or he had other writers, or the arrangements were.
I'm trying to think. Somehow I thought he did the arrangements, but I could be wrong. I don't remember. But it was literally like the arrangements of film scores and stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was really just another. I was in his band for a year or two.
Oh, that must have been wonderful. Yeah.
It was really fun.
And
he was a trip. Because the stereotype, you think of the French as somehow maybe being a little more particular or whatever, you know. He was like a cowboy. You know, we played somewhere in Pennsylvania during a blizzard, and we couldn't fly. We were supposed to go to Nashville, and he was like, "Let's get a plane. I'll fly it," you know, because he knew he had his pilot's license, and the rest of us were like, "I'm not getting on a plane with Michel Legrand flying the thing," you know. And so he actually hired a company to fly us there, and there was like an auxiliary keyboard player, and the guy was like crying. He was so afraid to fly because we took off in an awful blizzard, like feet of snow on the ground, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
So he was that guy, you know.
You're a better man than I gonna did. You
Yeah,
know, I'm not gonna know you get me on that plane. You know, I mean, you know, Hank Jones told me too. He said, "No way, he won't take a small plane." He said, you know, they could put him in a boat, but he's not going in a small plane. You know, and
yeah. I had a couple other small plane experiences. I won't go into it, but they were both, all of them were kind of terrifying, you know.
yeah, I mean, I've also avoided small planes. I, you know, tried to get away from that. Another person I was thinking of too that you had some experiences with was Tom Waits.
Yeah, and again, that was very brief. Um, uh, I played a couple tunes on one of his records called Frank's Wild Years, and then he did a film score about homeless children on the streets of LA, and I played on that.
Uh-huh.
But that was it, you know.
That was it. Yeah. Was
But he was totally cool. He was kind of like his persona, but not quite as exaggerated, you know. But he was actually a thoughtful, nice person, and it was fun.
yeah. And I was thinking also you had some Frank Zappa experiences too.
That again, that was one day of my life. My friend Chad Wackerman, who is an amazing drummer that played with Frank for many years, and Frank had just, this was probably about 82 or something. He had won a lawsuit with Warner Brothers to get the rights of his songs back, and he wanted to add acoustic bass to just as much stuff as he could do. So it was the day before I moved to New York. My bass was already in New York, so a guy lent me a bass. John Heddle lent me his bass, and I went to Frank's home in Studio City at about 10 in the morning, and left at about midnight. Recorded nonstop, and I was worried there was going to be some fly shit to read, you know, because he was infamous for just really hard stuff, and I didn't have to read one note of music, you know. We just added, you know, he just let me, it was almost like contemporary classical music and a lot of Arco stuff, and just let me, he'd run the tape and I would just play, and it ended up being on about 3 of his CDs.
Ah, so that's it. He just suddenly he wanted acoustic bass on everything.
Yeah, and Chad recommended me, my friend Chad, and again, delightful guy. You know, he smoked about 3 packs of cigarettes in the course of the day, you know, and but just was very cool, and it was really fun, you know.
And just I was thinking, this is another kind of the opposite of Frank Zappa was Lewis Smith. You know, that is the trumpet player that made that record that Cannonball produced years ago. From
Yeah,
I, what was? Is he still with us? Is he?
I know he was like, you know, again, Steeplechase asked me to play with him, and it's funny you mentioned that because tomorrow night I'm playing in Saratoga with Jimmy Green,
All right, wonderful
and
gentleman.
I forgot I did this record with Lewis. I was just looking at, you know, I Googled Jimmy yesterday because he said, oh, here's a couple of my tunes and you can hear them online, whatever. And I ended up at his website, and he had some of his discography there, and he said he was on a Lewis Smith recording called Soon, the tune Soon. And I'm like, oh, I'm on that record, you know. And so I double checked, and indeed we're on that together. So I have some fodder tomorrow to bring up with him.
Is he on the whole record or just that?
Oh no, he's on the whole record. We're both on the whole record,
Oh.
and we did the Jazz Cruise a few years ago together, and we did a steeplechase jam session record maybe 25 years ago. But so I'm looking forward to seeing Jimmy. You know, great player.
I mean, there's so many people, you know, on the scene. I mean, Steve Slagle and Dave Stryker, and you played with them, and Jay Clayton.
Yes. You know, Jay actually lived here in New Paltz. She had a home here, and she also with Sheila Jordan. She had a bed that they shared in Chelsea. But she was a dear friend. She passed, you know, a year ago, and something like that. Vic and Stryker and Slagle and Jay. You know, I have a studio here at my house, and I'm not Rudy Van Gelder, but you know, I've got decent mics, and if you have great musicians, that's about 90% of it, you know. So
yeah,
I've done some stuff with Jay here, and I've played a lot with Jay over the last 8 years or so, and Stryker and Slagle, and of course Vic.
Yeah, it's I'm finding it, you know, like Betty Davis said, you know, growing old is not for sissies.
Yeah.
It's, just in the last month, I've lost 3 friends who were long time, not but long time friends, you know, and
yeah.
And so, you know, you get to be our age, and that kind of thing happens.
Well, I remember being with Ira at the Jazz Showcase in Chicago, and you know, when I think about it, he's then he was younger than I am now, but I remember, you know, I remember playing with him, and he was like really upset and sad and quiet, which is unusual for him. Like, Ira, what's up? And he had just lost, like you said, about 3 friends that week, and he was just very sad. And yeah, that's what happens, you know.
It does. Now, one other thing is I noticed in your discography that you and Mike Richmond.
Yes.
Now that's Mike, the bass player.
Yes.
Is this a 2 bass? I was curious what.
No, Mike is a very serious cello player in the you know, in that tradition. So I played bass while he played cello.
Like the Oscar Pettiford tradition, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, we did one record of Oscar Pettiford music, and then one record of Bill Evans music with Andy Laverne playing piano, and Andy was tight with Bill. And I think maybe did 4 with him.
I see.
Which was, you know, he's a great bass player. I was always a fan, and then to, you know, just be around him and talk about his history and compare notes, compare bass notes. You know, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, Mike used to live in the same apartment building as Tom Harrell.
Oh,
years ago, and Tom and I would be practicing over at Tom's place, and then we'd go downstairs and play with Mike, just the 3 of us. And Mike was just a wonderful player. We played some gigs with him too, you know.
Yeah, he's still around. You know, he teaches at the NYU and still playing his ass off. You know.
But he was living in Pennsylvania for a long time, wasn't he?
Somehow I thought he lived in Jersey or something. I could be wrong.
Jersey, yeah, I get. But you know, I guess we've covered a lot of people. I mean, Joe Sample you played with.
Yeah, you know, he's somebody I would like to just touch on quickly, because I played with him for 14 years. And, you know, it was right, again, kind of when I got married, and, you know, we were very busy for 14 years, you know, and.
With Joe?
Yes. And.
Head out of Colorado, Joe was.
No, he was actually from Houston, Texas, originally, which is where the Crusaders were from.
Okay.
East Houston, I guess. And you know, he grew up with Hubert Laws and Wilton Felder and all those guys, Stix Hooper, and he wanted to have an acoustic jazz trio. And do you know Matt Pearson? He's a producer, produced a lot of records for Blue Note in the 80s and probably early 90s. And he said, Joe Sample's looking for a bass player. I suggested you. Do you want to do it? And so to audition. So I said, well, I'll audition, but I want to be the first guy. You know, I don't really want to be sitting out in the hallway with 6 other bass players, because it was like that kind of an audition, you know.
Right, let you go in and out.
Yeah, so I, not that I had any clout to do that, but I asked and they honored that. So I went and we played, and he hired me. And so, you know, and he lived in LA at that time and was a very successful player, leader, sideman, doing, you know, BB King records and Eric Clapton records and his own records, and just a bunch of stuff. And so I played all over the world with him for, I guess it was about 14 years, kind of right at the, I don't know if you would agree, but kind of, you know, your mid 30s to mid 50s is kind of the sweet spot of one's career, you know, and not too young and not too old. So right in that sweet spot is when I was playing with Joe. So in a way, it was at the expense of pursuing more things in New York. That's one of the reasons another reason why I told Maria I couldn't do her thing, because I was busy with Joe, you know. I could go to Japan for 6 weeks with him, or play, you know, in that course of that, a couple nights at Visiones, you know, so I opted for that. But, you know, I actually learned a lot playing with him. It was not swing jazz, you know, but early in his career, he was kind of an LA-based Hampton Hawes-ish type of player.
I'd heard that about him, you know, and I don't really know his music that well. You know, I've heard he was very more of a funky type of thing.
Yeah.
I know stories about Joe Sample, and let's say some of his eccentricities that were very humorous. A couple of stories I've heard, like from friends of mine that lived in Colorado. I think he was around there for a while. Is that right? Like he was in Denver or Boulder, one of those places.
He could have been. I just know LA and Houston, you know.
But you know, you got a funny story of him? I mean,
well, this is a great story, and I can't tell it. Is to hear Joe tell the story, and you know, I'll try to make it fast. But so, you know, Stix Hooper was the drummer with the Crusaders, and those guys had a long history. So this is probably in the 70s, and some vibes player that they knew from New York was playing at the Lighthouse. So Stix or Joe was like, well, we know the motel that those guys that are playing at the Lighthouse, which is in Hermosa Beach, Southern California, he's probably staying at this motel. Let's go down there and surprise him. So they would never do this now, but they went up to the front desk and they're like, oh, he's in room 16 or whatever. So they go to the room, and Stix pounds on the door, and he's like, open up the door, it's over. So, you know, and they could hear people talking in the room, and all of a sudden the talking stopped and nothing happened. They didn't open the door. So again, bam, 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 open the door, it's over. So then the light goes off in the room, and you hear scurrying in the room. And he does it one more time. And so finally, they see somebody like open up the curtain, and I wish I knew who it was, but you hear the guy go, motherfucker. And it turned out they thought they were saying, boom, 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 open the door, state trooper. Open the door, state trooper. And so they had whatever they were doing in there. They took the opportunity to flush it all down the toilet.
Oh no.
And so, but to hear Joe, I heard Joe tell that story about 4 times, and it's one of my favorite Joe Sample stories, you know.
That's a funny story, you know. I mean, Well, it's been delightful. I mean, we could go on and on. There's so many people. I mean,
Well,
is there anybody else? Let's think about anybody that I have my big list here, and
I
you
mean, I
worked with
mentioned,
David Bowie and
uh,
Celine Dion.
yeah,
That's ept.
those were one dayer kind of things, but I would mention just like Bob Mintzer, who
Oh yeah.
I played on a bunch of his records, and just what a great musician and guy, and composer and arranger and tenor players, just made a lot of music with him. And I played with, I'm lucky to play with a lot of great piano players, Phil Markowitz and Frank Kimbrough and Gary Dial and Andy Laverne, and just,
Yeah, Andy and I used to play a lot of duets together.
yeah. So,
I've got a great Mincer story. I've got to tell you.
okay.
He was going to Manhattan School of Music,
Mm-hmm.
and in spite of my lack of sight reading ability, Bobby called me. I said, "Man, sure," because I knew him. I'm a couple of years, 2 or 3 years older. I think he's your age.
Uh-huh.
I'm maybe 2 or 3 years older than he is. And he said, "Bob, would you come up to Manhattan?" He said, I've got this course in writing jingles, and I
Oh,
wrote this jingle, and they're going to do it like it was a real television commercial, and I have a certain amount of time. We got to get it and all this, and but I wrote this jingle, and the music's really good, man. I think you'd like it. Could you come up and play? Because there's an alto part, and I'd like you to play it. I said, sure. So I take the subway, go up to Manhattan, and I'm there, and it's it's hard. I'm not the only one scuffling. I mean, he's got really good cats in there too. I mean, but John Eckert, and I think was there, and some really serious horn players.
yeah, yeah.
So we do it, and we almost got it, but you're allotted 10 minutes, or something like 12 minutes or something, and the teacher is timing it. And if you don't have it together by then the band's fired. They're simulating. I don't know who you put it. So we almost had it, and we're starting to get it. It's shaping up, and then the teacher says, "That's it. Okay, your time's up. No more." And Bobby says, "No, listen, I got some great musicians here, and they came up on the subway, and it was a rainy day. They've come up in the rain on the subway to play my music, and I put a lot of time into this chart, and I want to hear my chart. I don't care." They said, "Well, if you were this for a commercial, they'd fire you. You wouldn't be." Bobby says, "I don't care. I want to hear it. I want to hear my piece, and I want to hear it now." And they said, "No." He said, "Really? Then fuck you." And
Oh,
Bobby stomps out. He stomps out, and I saw him maybe a month or so later. I ran into him, and he says, I said, "Boy, that was quite a heated little discussion there." He says, "Oh, maybe it was like a year later." He said, "I never went back. That was
really?
my last day of music school. That was my last day at Manhattan. I just said, fuck the whole thing. And I went and joined Buddy Rich or something like that. It's like,
Right.
that was, and that was,
Well,
I always,
so with that story, Bob, I can tell two short stories. There may be a good way to wrap things up.
okay.
So, I would come home from the road, and, you know, Marianne, my wife, would say, "Oh, how was the trip?" And of course, then I start talking about the travel and the missed flights and just all of the shit that every musician I know. So Marianne's like, "Honey, you really got to write a book." And I said, "Marianne, every musician I know has hundreds of these stories. So mine are no more interesting than anyone else's." But having said that, and you're talking about studios and jingles, it reminds me of two quick stories, and then we can call it. The first one is I played with Steve Gadd one time, and it was at a jingle. And I got to know him a little bit more because he was very tight with Joe Sample. But so we got called to do a Stouffer's Pizza commercial, and it was all these New York guys, and I was never that guy, but I got called to do this. And so Gadd's people come in and set up his drums, and all these legendary musicians are there. And I don't know if you remember this commercial, but it was with the Smothers Brothers, and the jingle was "Help yourself to Stouffer's Pizza." So the bass part was boom, 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 boom. And Gadd's part was like, you could train a monkey to play it, but they had Steve Gadd to go boom, 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 boom. Or, you know, that was the whole thing.
Stouffer's Pizza.
And we did it in one take. So I played 4 notes with Steve Gadd. And I've seen the commercial on YouTube. I actually Googled it. I don't think it's there anymore, but to see if it was what I remembered. But it was, and I reminded him of that. And of course, he's played thousands of them, so I don't even know if he remembered. But that's my one story. And the other one, I got called to do a Ray-Ban sunglass commercial. And it was kind of right when they would, the composer would do a MIDI version of the song, and then they would hire musicians to come in and replace each part. So it's me and 3 people from the ad agency and the engineer. So I go in, and you know, again, very simple, but so I play it, and there's a silence in the control room, and I can tell they're having a discussion. So the woman, she's got like a pearl necklace and a nice green dress. You know, she said, she pushes the button, "Excuse me, but, you know, I don't really know music, but could you play it a little more blue?" And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" You know, and I was probably a little bit of an asshole. I said, "What is, you know, can somebody put it in musical terms so I could translate it?" So, well, just a little more blue. So whatever. I did it again, and it was fine. So that was that. Okay, fine. So now I'm packing up my bass, and Randy Brecker comes in. And now he's going to put a trumpet part on. And I'm kind of eating the crudité in the lobby, and I'm just saying hi to Randy and just kind of hanging while he does his thing. And so he plays, and of course it's Randy, and it's perfect. And the same woman does the same thing. She pushes the button, and she's like, "A trumpet player, could you play it a little more?" And she said another color. You know, "Could you play it a little more red?" And Randy said, "Great idea." And then he did it again, however he was going to do it. And they loved it, you know. And I just, watching him in that situation, who's, you know, he'd done it thousands of times, and me in that situation, I really learned something that day, you know, just to like, just say yes and go, you know.
Yeah, Randy's very diplomatic,
Yes.
and he's interesting. He does it also. Joe Lovano has this quality. They can do it their way while convincing somebody that they're doing it their way without ever kissing ass.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that's a talent.
That's a gift.
That's
And
a
that's
gift.
the perfect note to wrap it up on, because
Your chicken's ready.
huh?
Because your chicken is ready.
My chicken is ready, but more, you know, you mentioned, oh, when you asked me to do this, you said, "Oh, you've done all these things that I never even knew you did," and but you're a jazz guy, but you do this. And you know, to me, it's I would like to think um, that for all of us, yourself included, or any musician who you respect, and there's thousands of them, because you know, you played so much incredible music for so long, you know, and it's like to find your voice on the instrument. And you know, when you think of any great, you know, I say this to students, okay, Train, Bird, Lee Morgan, Freddie Hubbard, Max Roach, Dave Holland, whatever. What is the first thing you think of with any of those people? And oh, but they play a bunch of hip shit, and you know, I I could be wrong, but I always think of their sound, you know. And so the same for you, you know. And I was like, you know, nurture that, and just, you know, play a lot of music and find your voice, because that's really the reason to do what we do. And if you do it well, it can translate into, you know, style and genre almost becomes irrelevant, you know, and you can play a lot of great music with a lot of great people, while being yourself. And that's, to me, the most important thing. You know,
Well,
not,
that's
not
funny. I was going to ask you if you had, and it's interesting. I was going to say, in fact, my last thing in the very bottom of my page, I said, memorable advice that he's received and from who. And you have your own that you've just given us, which is, it came from you. I mean, it's come from all of us in some ways. Anybody who really can do this says, well, sound has to be first. I mean,
yeah.
what do? You produce a sound on an instrument, and if you don't sound good, nobody wants to hear it.
Well, and I'm sure you've had this too, where, a friend of yours, you're talking on the phone, or I was listening to BGO and I heard a cut on the radio and I knew it was you, and that's when people started saying that to me, I was like, man, that's like the greatest compliment ever. Because there's people that can play faster or higher or whatever, but it's just to be yourself, and takes a while to find that, and
Well,
took me a while to find that, but I would like to think it's something I'm still nurturing and developing and embracing.
I think so. Me too. And on that note, just to finish it, and not just in music, Lee Conant said the funny thing one time. Somebody said to Lee, Lee, you're basically kind of a shy person. You're not a real extroverted type of person, and I am too. But you seem to get along very well in social situations, and you do this, and I feel awkward. I never feel right. Do you have any? How do you do it? What you got any advice? Lee said, well, just be yourselves.
Be yourselves, plural. Great advice.
Anyway, Jay, it's been a pleasure to be with you and all yourselves. And it's great, man. I always wanted to, I'm glad we got this chance
No,
to.
this is great, Bob, and thanks so much for including me in this series. And I hope we can make some music together here sometime soon.
I sure hope so, man. If I'm playing it in my house. I'm not appearing. I should tell people because of my illness. I don't
Uh-huh.
go to be on high risk,
Yeah,
and
no, I'm
I can't fly either or anything. So or go anywhere mountainous. But my apartment is not too high. It's the sixth floor, and we can record over here too. If you got any of your recording equipment that's portable enough to.
yeah, my recording equipment isn't that movable, but I am, and so is my bass. So I'll come over and we'll play, man. And
That sounds.
thanks again for having me, man.
I love that, and thank you, Jesse, for taking care of all this. And we want to thank everybody for watching us. And it's wonderful to have the great Jay Anderson with us. And we will see you next time on the real side. And if you enjoyed this, or how do I say this? I never say this right. But I hope you enjoyed it as much as Jesse and I have, and Jay. And it doesn't cost you anything to give us a like and subscribe to our channel. It may not seem like much, but it helps us a lot. So once again, we thank you. We thank Jay. And like I said, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Jay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.